Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're just going to give it another minute or two as everybody gets in to Zoom. So we'll get started shortly.
Oops. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait one more minute and then we'll get started at 9:02. Okay, I think we're at 9:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's agenda. I'm going to drop that into the chat right now. So welcome. Thank you for joining us wherever you are for the very first ever DLF Born Digital Access Working Group Virtual Colloquium. I'm going to try to keep things brief because we have 4 great presentations on the schedule today, and I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. We have created a hashtag for today's event, which is DLF BDAWG, so please feel free to use that on social media if you would like. My name is Carla Irwin, and I am one of the co-coordinators for the Born Digital Access Working Group, or what we affectionately call BDAWG. Jessica and Gail, would you like to say hello?
Hi, everyone. This is Jessica Dermasic of Williams College. I'm also a co-coordinator of the BDAWG affectionately named group, and thank you all for attending. Gail, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Schechter, and I'm the Program Associate for DLF.
And a big thanks to Gail. She has really helped us with all the logistics for today and all the Zoom magic. So a big round of applause for Gail.
100%.
Yes. Next slide, please. Oh, back one. Oh, no, sorry. That's right. My bad. All right. So I just want to do a quick plug for BDAWG. Welcome to anyone here who is currently not a member. The DLF Born Digital Access Working Group, which was formed in 2017, produces research on and advances the practice of providing access to born digital collections. Our group is open to everyone, and we currently have about 180 members. We have bi-monthly meetings, and there are lots of opportunities for becoming engaged based on your area of interest and availability. So please join our Google group, and we can, if you just reach out to Jessica and I, we can help you with whatever you need and any questions. Next slide. So just a few things to keep in mind today. Please keep yourself muted unless you are presenting. We have automatically muted everyone today except for the presenters. As I mentioned, we have 4 presentations today, and the presenters will introduce themselves in the interest of saving time. We will go through all the presentations first and then do a round of Q&A at the end. And if you think of questions during the presentation portion, please feel free to add them to the chat box. I'll be keeping track of those during the presentations. We are also recording today's colloquium, so the recording and slides will be made available at some point after today's event. Unfortunately, we are unable to provide captioning, so I apologize for that, but the recording will have captions added for increased accessibility. Next slide. Finally, we are abiding by the DLF Code of Conduct for today's event. I'm not going to read through this whole statement, but it is also easily findable on the DLF website. So up first, we have David Underdown. David, are you here? Or Gail, do you know if David's here?
I just made him a co-host, so he should be able to unmute himself.
Okay. David, would you like to go first, or would you rather wait till the end since you're just getting settled in?
Can you see and hear me now?
Yes, welcome.
Perfect. Sorry, I was having a few technical issues. I have to use Zoom on my personal laptop. I can't use it on my work laptop.
Oh no.
And now it was being very slow to start, so I'm now on my iPad. So hopefully that's going to work.
It looks, yep, your slides are up on the screen.
Can you see them?
Yes, thank you. Right.
Just let me know when to turn the slides.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon from London, everyone. Hope you're having a good day over there. So if we can move on to the first proper slide. So to bring this to access, since that's what we're, it is the One Digital Access Working Group, and ultimately what we are trying to preserve in digital preservation is the access to the content. So moving on to the next slide. Why we're building a risk model. So why did we start doing this? We've got digital heritage, we all know, is rich, complex and fragile. There's a lot of threats out there, rapidly evolving technology, potentially outdated policies and standards. We've got 20 years also probably of things like OAS and so on now. But what we probably haven't done as a community is actually sort of test those standards back and show that they're actually working effectively and doing what we expect. And certainly in the UK and probably elsewhere, but we definitely have the evidence in the UK that there's a real skills gap across the archive sector and the wider GLAM sector in terms of the digital skills. People haven't always come from the backgrounds where they've had the chance to develop those skills. Next slide. So we're building a new risk management framework for digital archivists, looking at digital preservation risks. The model, we believe, will help improve the understanding of users to understand the complex risk landscape that digital archiving is, and the way that actually risk factors interplay. They're not all independent of each other. So, if an increase in risk in one area will have an impact on another, or all archives and GLAM institutions have limited resources as well. So while we might want to fix everything and mitigate as many risks as possible, in practice we have limited resources. We can only do kind of a few things at a time. We want to understand which ones should we prioritize, compare different risks, and then potentially look at costs, obviously, and decide which ones, how we get the best impact on risk from the available mitigations and the costs and our resources. And so part of that is quantifying the impact of those risk events and potential risk management strategies on our actual outcomes of preserving material. Use that to support our own decision making, communicate with stakeholders, and do things like developing business cases for targeted action. Next slide. So it's a joint project between the National Archives in the UK, and we started working with statisticians at the Applied Statistics and Risk Unit in the University of Warwick. So they're there to actually turn academic statistical research into useful things for people to use. We have also 5 archives partners from across England, really, not just not the whole of the UK. So we've got 2 county archives, essentially, so county record offices, Dorset and Gloucestershire. So they have a responsibility for local heritage in those areas. We've got TfL, that's Transport for London. They're corporate archives, so they're the people. Transport for London run the tube and the red double-decker buses and everything else like that in London, the public transportation network. We've got the special collections at the University of Leeds and the design archives at the University of Brighton. And also the Digital Preservation Coalition have also had their staff contributing and also helped us organise a series of workshops disseminating material, and they're doing the formal project evaluation. We've had funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and also one of the research councils in the UK, so we need that formal evaluation to show the appropriate use of funding. Next slide, please. So how do we go about doing this? Click. Next, please. So we started just drawing things up, thinking as we go along how these things interact. After much discussion, we've talked through how different things interact. Do we really need to include this? Where are we going to draw the line? You know, the problem with building a model is always you run the risk of modeling the entire world. You think, oh, we've got to pull that in as well. And ultimately you realize, you know, we only had a certain amount of funding, so there's so much we can build now. We think it'll give us something that's useful, practical, and start to show the impact of this approach. There will undoubtedly be further work that could be done to drill down, improve modeling in some areas and bring in more. So once we've built that initial network, next please. You also need the probabilities that go under that, and this is why, you know, Bayesian is all about conditional probabilities. So given that this has happened, given we've got technical metadata and we've got using a certain storage, what does that tell us then about the probabilities of obsolescence in that case? Next, please. You could potentially actually use machine learning to kind of learn the structure and the probabilities if you had a large and complete data set, but we've definitely found within digital preservation we just oftentimes don't really have hard data to start with. Next, please. So this is what the overall network looks like. Next, please. So we have two key outcomes that we're measuring. So renderability is where, to some extent, access comes in. You know, we have an object; it's a sufficiently useful representation of the original file, so that brings in a bit the idea that we could be migrating files, or maybe you're using emulation to give access and get into the file, and also having intellectual control over all the content. So you can actually, it's all very well preserving the bit stream, but if you can't actually identify it among all the stuff you've got, find what you're looking for, then you still, what have you actually preserved if you can't get into the content in that sense. Next, please. Yeah, so if we look at just one of the nodes here, so obsolescence here, we do have to be quite careful how things are defined. So here we're really talking more about obsolescence of hardware or operating system kind of level software. It's not about format obsolescence. So that's why we've got dependencies on the storage medium. It depends very much, you know, is it a tape? Are we talking about some early digital video media maybe, or something like that, where we just can't get access? And we also have technical skills coming in there, because yes, it might be really difficult to do that, but if you really had a very skilled practitioner, you might still be able to get that off. And together those things then with other things like the actual expected storage life, and having the integrity of the things, so using checksums and all those things, give us that bit of preservation, and then feed down to renderability with the other things as well. Next, please. So as I said, we don't always have hard data, so we had to use an expert elicitation process to weigh the opinions of experts and use that as a substitute for hard data for some areas. So we're using this IDEA protocol. Next, please. So what we do first, you investigate. So we have a range of questions to ask the experts. There's some discussion of those questions, investigating, making sure everyone understands them in the same way, and then estimates. You do your initial estimates, shown on the right there. You get a range graph from all the experts. You then have a discussion of those estimates, understand why people are estimating so very differently, why some people seem quite confident, other people are giving a very wide range. Once you've had that discussion, there's another round of estimates, which irons out some of those differences. You're not looking for complete consensus. And there's then statistical aggregation of those to come up with final data to be used as the probabilities in the tables. Next, please. So what we have is this new tool called Diagram, the Digital Archiving Graphical Risk Assessment Model. That's available now as a prototype. There's still the big orange banner there saying very much still under development. So this puts all this underlying stuff into practice. To use it, you initially answer 9 questions about your own archives. So that's talking about things like what storage are you using? Do you have offsite backups? What kind of proportion of born digital versus surrogates and so on do you have? And from that, it gives you some of those, the graphs you can see there, giving you an indication of your risk levels. You can then look at adjusting some of those. So you can be sort of thinking in 4 or 5 years time, perhaps we'd have better technical skills, or we've moved to better storage, see what that does to the risk levels. I should say that a better score actually means a lower risk level. There's a huge amount more of information on the project at the link there. It'll be available afterwards. You can go away and play with that. We are just in the process of hiring a user interface developer to do some work from the feedback we've had so far to try and make it easier and more straightforward to people to use. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was great.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Dundon, Supervisory Archivist at University of California, Santa Cruz. And co-presenting with me is Shira Peltzman, Digital Archivist at UCLA. And our presentation is part and parcel weaving born digital into the UC guidelines for efficient processing. Next slide. So Shira and I participated in an initiative to revise the guidelines for efficient archival processing in the University of California libraries, which was originally published in 2012. It was developed in response to a survey of UC library archival holdings that identified a 71,600 linear foot backlog and an estimated 5,800 collections with no public facing record. It also spoke to the cultural shift toward efficient processing in the profession. So the guidelines became broadly acknowledged as a template for implementing efficient processing techniques, which have now become standard practice for many archivists. But over time, language in the document became outdated, links were broken, and there was a growing sense in the profession that efficient processing, while important to addressing backlogs, could not eliminate them on its own. It became clear that larger issues with collection management, appraisal, accessioning, and over-collecting needed to be called out as major contributors to the growth of our physical and digital backlogs. In 2018, a group of UC archivists began to talk about how the guidelines were currently being used and how it could better advocate for improved collection management. We worked together for about 2 years to reframe the guidelines from kind of more of a defense of efficient processing toward a more modern and holistic set of collection management practices, including a stronger emphasis on pre-custodial appraisal, accessioning, extensible processing, deaccessioning, and significantly the integration of born digital stewardship throughout all of these stages. In doing this, we were trying to make clear the inherently collaborative and interconnected nature of archival work. Next slide. There were 12 members of the revision team from across the University of California libraries. Highlighted here are the members of the sub-team that wrote the guidelines for Born Digital. Elvia Arroyo Ramirez, UC Irvine, Charlie McQuarrie, UC San Francisco, and Shira Peltzman, UCLA. Next slide.
So on the surface, our task was simple. We were asked to review the section pertaining to Born Digital, determine what needed to be changed, and then suggest revisions accordingly. This would have been fine, but the problem was that the Born Digital section of the original UC guidelines consisted of about a single paragraph's worth of advice, or around 293 words by my count. We quickly understood that the lack of substantive guidance meant that we would essentially need to write the section from scratch. But after just a couple brainstorming meetings, it became clear that we would need to rethink this plan. The list of things we wanted to address was so expansive that creating a separate section for Born Digital would be unworkable. In addition, we shared a belief that the guidelines would speak to the should speak to the day-to-day experiences of archivists throughout the UC system. Born digital processing is archival processing, and to cordon off Born digital and treat it as a distinct or boutique thing was, in our view, neither practical nor realistic. Our team approached Kate to advocate for interweaving processing and management strategies for Born digital content throughout the document, so that Born digital was fully incorporated into the fabric of the UC guidelines rather than being segregated into a separate standalone section. Both Kate and the group at large were entirely supportive of this, but the expanded scope of the Born digital team's role in the revision process meant that we'd have to rejigger the work plan and slightly extend the timeline to account for this additional work. Restructuring the project work plan was important, both because it gave us the time and the space necessary to do this work justice, but more importantly, it was also a teachable moment of sorts for the project team at large, since it underscored our point that it isn't practical or efficient to address Born digital separately or after the fact. It's a core part of our work as archivists, and it needs to be understood as such. Next slide, please. All in all, we introduced a number of recommendations pertaining to Born digital. I don't have time to go into these in great detail, so I'm going to sort of skim over them briefly. First and foremost, we acknowledged the need for a digital preservation policy, which was explicitly called out and which I feel very, very proud of, because I think it's critical if we're dealing with Born digital content to underscore the need for preservation. We also grounded the guidelines in a more holistic approach, as Kate mentioned, that really emphasizes the interrelatedness of each stage in the archival life cycle, and particularly the impact that earlier stages have on downstream stages of that process. As far as accessioning goes, we really tried to address the reality that it means something very specific when it comes to Born digital archival materials, i.e. you haven't truly accessioned the material until you've taken it off of that legacy media on which it sits. And to that end, we also tried to provide baseline steps for Born digital accessioning, set some kind of sort of basic bar that people could try and meet in that process. For appraisal and deaccessioning, we really tried to emphasize the importance of doing appraisal prior to accessioning and really underscore the impact that the curatorial process, or in the case of Born digital, the lack of a curatorial process upfront can have later on during processing. Next slide, please. Speaking of processing, one of the things that we really tried to do was these guidelines and the guidelines that came before them have a real emphasis on using metrics to guide processing planning and like time estimation. And we really wanted to make it clear that it's complicated to do this for Born digital, and so we tried to push back on the idea that it's possible to kind of easily quantify the time it takes to process a set amount of Born digital content. We also, importantly, tried to encourage folks to really emphasize a logical file transfer approach. And we, in fact, actively discouraged disk imaging, except for when it was, explicitly appropriate to the content that was being preserved. And then finally, we really tried to make a distinction between files that live on legacy media like floppy disks versus contemporary working files. We wanted to underscore that these need to be treated differently with different expectations regarding the planning process, because it just is a whole different kettle of fish to take something off of a piece of legacy media as it is to simply transfer the files from a working hard drive or computer. And then when it comes to description, we also, one thing we really tried to do was to emphasize that if a collection contains Born digital material, whether or not it's been processed, this should be noted at the collection level, and we shouldn't kind of, hide it by omitting the mention of it, even if it isn't processed, and to just make that more transparent. There were also a number of points where we cross-referenced advice in the UC guidelines for Born digital archival description, which was written several years previously to this. So that's a big improvement, because now these two documents, these two UC-wide set of guidelines, talk nicely to one another. Next slide, please. For anyone who would like to read these recommendations in full, the UC guidelines can be accessed at this bit.ly link. I highly recommend checking it out. It's a labor of love.
Thank you.
And I think, oh, do I have time for one more little couple sentences?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to, add on Cher's comment that it's a labor of love. It was published in May of this year, and it's been visited over 2,200 times and downloaded 500 times. And I just put the link to it in the chat. I also see some questions in the chat that I think we can address during Q&A. And I just wanted to say that we acknowledge that the publication of this document is not going to immediately result in all of the University of California libraries all of a sudden prioritizing born digital appraisal and accessioning, but we think it's a step toward this direction, and it's a useful advocacy tool. And I think it's actually already done a lot to expose the nuances of born digital processing, appraisal and accessioning to UC librarians who wouldn't have otherwise known about this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Annalise and Kelly.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'll just introduce myself and then I will let Annalise introduce herself. But my name is Kelly Boulding. I'm a project archivist for the manuscripts division at Princeton. Annalise?
Yep, hi. Yeah, I'm Annalise Berdini. I'm the digital archivist for special collections at Princeton.
Great. So we're going to talk today about recent developments in born digital access at Princeton. And while we've long dreamed of building a virtual reading room to provide broader access to our collections, the pandemic and the subsequent shift to virtual learning has renewed the library's focus on digital access. So we'll share about our born digital access journey to date and our collaboration with IT colleagues to implement virtual reading room functionality for both born digital and digitized materials within our existing local digital repository. Next slide, please. So before we delve into our plans for the future, we want to provide some background on the current state of born digital access at Princeton. So Firestone Library, which houses manuscripts division collections, currently provides nearly all access to born digital materials via lockdown laptops in the special collections reading room. This is largely due to concerns over copyright and third-party privacy, but we hope to make more of our collections available online behind a login through the new system. Mudd Library, which houses the University Archives and Public Policy Papers, provides online access to about 1,500 components of unrestricted born digital content that are linked through our Finding Aid site. So content that cannot be placed online currently requires manual intervention by archivists to fulfill user requests. Next slide, please. So our current system presents several obstacles, which we hope that the virtual reading room will address. So with our current reading room computers, we've struggled to efficiently manage content across 3 separate lockdown machines. We've experimented with several models, including pushing content from a hub computer to linked access laptops using a local network. But we've yet to settle on something that works both from a technical standpoint and enables an efficient workflow for our public services colleagues. For online content, until recently, the linked material lived in WebSpace, which is a file storage system managed by Princeton's Office of Information Technology. However, OIT sunsetted WebSpace this year, so Annalise is currently migrating this content from WebSpace into Figgy, which is our library's digital repository system. So far, about 1,000 digital objects have been migrated into the new system, with 200 remaining complex objects that can't be ingested at this stage. WebSpace was also never particularly user-friendly to begin with, so we look forward to improving the user experience in our new system. And in addition to the technical challenges, we also face some organizational ones. These include a past tendency to prioritize digitized materials over born digital, which could in part be due to the fact that we have less information on how much these materials are used. There's also the issue of building our institutional risk tolerance, as well as the fact that our IT staff are stretched thin between several concurrent projects. So at the moment, we're currently in the process of migrating both the back and front end of our archival management and discovery systems to ArchivesSpace and ArcLight respectively, all while supporting an increased need for remote access. Next slide, please. So this slide was the joke in our running list of title ideas for this presentation, but there is certainly some truth to it. While a virtual reading room has been among our long-term goals for several years now, it took the current situation for our administration to recognize this as an urgent priority. So since researchers cannot currently visit our reading room, it's even more important to have a mechanism for mediating access that does not require users to visit a physical location. Next slide, and I'll also hand it over to Annalise.
Hi, so the Virtual Reading Room Task Force was preceded by work that my colleagues at Firestone and I had been doing a lot more kind of individually and on an ad hoc basis, which Kelly spoke about earlier. So in December 2019, kind of in conjunction with the sunset of WebSpace, I was tasked with pulling their work together with work I had been doing on that project and to try to improve our remote access systems. So I had kind of been doing this a little bit on my own with some support, but it was, you know, when I could find time, and our library was moving. So with the arrival of the pandemic and some new leadership in special collections, we were suddenly in a position where remote digital access was considered more essential, you know, despite the fact that we brought it up many times. So I met with leadership in May of 2020, and the decision was made to create a formal virtual reading room task force with an expanded project scope, formal partnership with our library IT staff, and a brand new deadline of September of 2020. So we now had far more resources and especially staff time to devote to our goals, but with that, a much shorter timeline to achieve remote access for materials that technically didn't even have anywhere to live yet. So members included staff from tech services, from public services, a curator, the head of tech services, and almost most essentially, a project manager from library IT who was able to advocate for our requests. Next slide, please. So I've talked a lot about the work that I've done previously on the WebSpace transition, and much of the work that we did during that project was to partner with library IT to expand our existing sort of pseudo-DAMs, which is a homegrown system that we call Figgy. So Figgy was originally designed to provide access for digitized materials, but we were working on expanding its scope to include born digital materials as well, which had a much wider variety of formats. Crucially, it offers us varying tiers of mediated access. It has preservation and auditing of files that are ingested. It allows us to automate DAO inserts into our finding aids. And it also provides automated metadata extraction from finding aids and the catalog, which is really great. It also has a viewer for a few major file types that we have, and it allows us to make extensive metadata entry and editing, copyright management, bulk ingest, and a number of other features. This system was a huge boost to our project because it included so many of the requirements that we knew we would need for a virtual reading room, especially the mediated tiers of access. So instead of having to start from scratch, we just had to expand upon those tiers. So right now we have tiers that include, you can see in the slide, completely closed content, which we don't really need because we want our material to be accessible. Princeton ID only, on-campus only, which utilizes our on-campus IP addresses. The Rare Books Special Collections Reading Room only, which is through the laptop system Kelly mentioned earlier. And then of course, open. In addition to those levels, we plan to add remote access with a password and a magic link only access that will be especially useful for classes where professors can provide one link to their students through Canvas, for example, and then they have access to a certain object for a certain period of time. Next slide, please. On top of Figgy, Library IT is also in process of developing a controlled digital lending service, which will give us even more control over the types of content sharing we can do. While the tiers I mentioned in Figgy apply to most of our collection materials, there are a few that have more limiting access restrictions, especially the ones that Kelly talked about in Firestone that have kind of copyright concerns in particular. So this project allows for timed checkout of digital objects, which will serve very well both for course reserves and also for some of those materials at Firestone. We're able to display a copyright warning. We can have users sign up, They can reserve an object. They get to check it out for a certain period of time. And as soon as they open it, they get kind of a timer that counts down, you know, how long they have the object for. And they can also enter a queue to check it out. Next slide, please. So there are still many functions that we need to build out for our virtual reading room, many of which involve further development of both Figgy and our finding aid site, which is getting a major redesign. We're still working out how we can alert our users to a digital objects access status in cases where a password is needed in the finding aid site, for example. We're working on a view-only option so that users can see an object but not download it. We can do that through the controlled digital lending service, but we're still working out how to pair that with Figgy and with our finding aid site. Most of our goals are a little bit beyond our September deadline, but we've made a lot of progress, really significant progress due to the additional resources, and most importantly, the time that we've been given to devote to this project. Next slide, please. So thank you. We would love to hear from others who are working on similar efforts, and we're definitely here to answer any questions people might have. Thanks so much.
Go back.
There we go. Sorry.
That's okay. Good morning and afternoon. So I'm Sheridan Sales. I'm the Technical Services Archivist at Seton Hall University, and I'm beginning to think there's a theme of work being moved online. No clue what that's for, but in any case, I'm here to talk with my colleague Brian, who will introduce himself in a bit, to talk about ethical online internships and just how to go about moving that online in the most ethical way possible. So just to kind of give a little context for what we mean by ethical, in the context of an unpaid internship, we are looking at a scenario in which we can do the most good and towards those who are actively learning. So by this, I mean prepare the intern for the job market through both giving this person marketable skills and also having the flexibility to move at the intern schedule and also give advice and just in general make sure that their well-being is accounted for while also giving them the most marketable product possible at the end of their internship. So Brian, I take it over to you.
All right, and if we could get the next slide. Hi there, I'm Brian Reel. I am an assistant professor of information and library science at Southern Connecticut State University. We are a very recently ALA accredited program. Southern has had an MLIS program for years, but it got into some trouble a few years back. I was hired as part of the rebuilding process in 2018. And when you're accredited by ALA, it means that you have been operating to ALA standards for several years. So any of our students who have graduated in the last 2 years are considered to have an accredited degree. We're the only MLIS program in Connecticut. We're mainly focusing on New England for our expansion because there's no program in the states of Vermont, New Hampshire, or Maine. So we're a mostly online program that's been building up, but we've wanted to keep a strong connection on the ground in Connecticut. That was one of ALA's criticisms years ago when the program lost accreditation. And as such, even though all the other classes are online, students have been required to complete an in-person, on-site internship. That has allowed me to have a lot of oversight as the internship coordinator. I go and I visit every site. I spend some time on the phone talking to the site supervisor about how they can provide the best experience. I make sure that we don't have students doing what I call coffee fetching internships. This really has to contribute to these students' careers. And I should note that this is a 3-credit internship, so often it's unpaid. At 120 hours for the on-site requirement, I don't see the same ethical problem as this is the equivalent of a full-time job for a semester and a student not getting paid. That's something I wouldn't touch. But you know, this is supposed to be an experience that is, you know, like a class, and it truly adds to what a student can do. So I was able to handle that better with the on-site stuff. We had been thinking of online in limited cases at some point. And as many of you know, COVID changed a lot of stuff. So suddenly I had 2 interns in the field who I had to yank out because everything was shutting down, and I had 9 students enrolled for summer internships, and I had no plans. Our local public libraries, with all of their people working from home, they needed to have enough projects that could be done remotely to give their own people time. So public libraries that had kind of been my bread and butter for internship placements, none of them were hosting people. Virtually all of my prior connections for where I had placed students were no longer useful. So I scrambled, I started to work on plans for placements, and I asked friends. Sheridan and I know each other from when we were in grad school at University of Maryland, so she was one of the first to step up. If I could get the next slide, please. So geography suddenly no longer mattered for us, so I've been able to do some interesting stuff with placements. We have a local technology nonprofit that was going to do a technology summer camp. They are now doing that online. So I was able to place a few students there, but also some other national organizations that were surprising to me, like the National Baseball Hall of Fame. I had a student who was really into baseball, and I was like, all right, let me send an email, and it worked out. But it's been an interesting opportunity, and because of a lot of the experiences we've had, I'm not eager to go back. I still want a lot of on-the-site internships when things return to normal, but people like Sheridan have stepped up and given our students experiences that are fully rounded, that are project-oriented, that are going to add to these students' careers. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Sheridan to describe how she has worked with one of my students.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So before I talk about how I'm working with this particular intern, I would like to give context on what this internship model looks like in general, like in the physical, before translating it to the web. So I take a student-centered approach to designing the work plan, in which the first step I take starts with looking at gaps in the student's resume. I ask them to send me a resume, give me a couple ideas for what they want to do for the internship. And then I start to see gaps, like what sort of skills are they missing and what can I do in a small scale project to build on this. From there, I have another interview in which I just talk very briefly, very informally, like, oh, what is it you hope to do in the long term? What skills do you feel like you need? And then get the intern's input and translate that with like my own expertise and come up with a small scale project that builds onto this. So for an example, I might pick in a physical context, a 1 to 2 linear foot collection and model through them all the phases of working through this collection as they would on the job. I give them guided practice through things like setting the arrangement note and start to talk about appraisal, that's the word I was looking for. And then also translate some of the connections that they would have gotten through Brian in the classroom, for example, respect to fonts, and show how it plays out in this particular collection. So for example, if we're having an organizational, records of an organization, how does respect to fonts differ in this case versus that of personal papers? And through there, I also pepper in check-ins just to see how's it going. Would you like me to look at your resume? Do you have any particular questions about this? And finally, any sort of major decision that the intern or I have to like work through as part of this work plan is something that we model together, and I just out loud kind of explain, how I got there. So this is very helpful in first figuring out like arrangement, for example, and saying, okay, well, considering that they're in this organizational collection, they have records of minutes and files of the leadership, then we can say, all right, based off of these type of records, I can build the arrangement structure from there and just translate what that looks like, because it's one thing to hear about in the classroom and an entirely different thing to see it in action. And beyond that, I also just take those mini projects and translate them into specific skills. So I've mentioned arrangement and appraisal very often, and translate exactly how that would look in a resume. So that's a sense of what the internship looks like for me. Now I'm going to talk about what this means when we go online. I still have, for the most part, the same structure. The interview, we talk about gaps and then build skills from there. The big thing that's different though is I need to make sure that the check-ins, like the more informal check-ins in person, are very scheduled, structured, so the student has a sense of when we need to talk about things, and also make sure, like, it's very easy to get lost in the shuffle when you're not physically in front of the person. So having a weekly or more often check-in just to say, how is it going? Do you need anything? Let's work through any technical difficulties and build from there. So in the case of the intern I'm working with Brian, I've highlighted 3 major skills that I'm working on with this person. We are having her complete a few web crawls of Seton Hall social media accounts. And this is helpful in not only giving her practice in digital collecting, like what do these crawls look like, but we're also giving her insight on the accessioning process. Later on, once the web crawls are done, we are going to have a meeting, myself, my supervisor, and her as well. We will fill out the accession documentation together. So while we have ultimate control of the situation, so she's not at risk if anything weird comes up, she at least has enough transparency and know what the methodology looks like. I'm also working with her on a digital project. In this case, working with a mapping system, so she can see not just the value of linked data, but in all of this, so with not just getting the web crawls, accessioning them, she will also be adding these web crawls to the finding aid for the larger collection. Through this, she is able to translate the same number of skills as she would in an in-person setting, but also I'm giving her the example of working with 4 different individual systems. So she's still coming away with this with the same number of skills, even though she's not in an in-person setting. Next slide. And finally, I just want to end showing literally the documentation I share with the student at the onset of their internship, so they not only know what to expect, but also what they're going to get out of it. This matrix has a clearly defined set of projects that shows what they're going to do, how long it's going to take, and what they're going to get out of it. And also I translate in ways that is going to make the most sense for them to, if they want to copy and paste it into their resume, they can copy and paste into their resume. I'm using the exact same verbiage that's going to be translatable to a hiring manager. And beyond just the immediate resume skills, this is especially important in a digital internship as it gives the student a clear sense of structure and reinforces to me as well the lessons I want to be sure to pass on as they go through this internship. Next slide. And that is everything. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. I think I'll stop the screen share and we can open up the floor to questions, right, Carla?
Yep, that sounds good. I can start off while you're closing
Yeah.
out your screen. So we had quite a few questions and a lot of great comments come in during the presentations. So the first question we have, we got two similar questions for Shira and Kate. Can you say more about why logical versus disk images, and what is the reasoning behind the focus on logical file transfer over disk imaging?
Yeah, I can take that. So this was for a number of reasons. I want to give a shout out to work done on sustainability, ecological sustainability done by Laura Alanya, Tessa Walsh, Keith Pendergrass, and Walker Sampson. They've really done a lot over the past several years to make me more aware of the environmental impact that larger storage entails. You know, when you create a disk image of something like, you know, a laptop or a hard drive, that is, and then you're replicating that, you know, in several different places. Including an extra copy that, you know, for as like a working copy, that's really a lot of storage, and that storage has a real impact on the environment, particularly over time. And so that was part of it. There's also a number of privacy concerns that we have about things on, you know, PII that we don't even realize is there, or the donor doesn't remember is there. And then also, I think too, it's, for me, a huge part of it is when you're asking for logical file transfers, generally you're taking specific files and not every single file that's there. And for me, that really helps to be a form of like soft advocacy for more involvement at that curatorial stage. And to really underscore the point to curators, like, hey, you know, in the same way that we wouldn't keep an entire storage unit's worth of stuff sight unseen, like, you need to give us some direction. Let's, you know, let's do this together. Let's really look at what's important to keep here. I saw somebody in the chat mention emulation efforts. So at the University of California, we are very driven by MPLP, and so part of that means assigning what we call a value score to all the collections that we bring in. So when we take in those collections, there's a lot of thought given to considerations, including, like, you know, its sort of research value. I really recommend reading the guideline, this part of the guidelines, because it sums it up in much more detail and nuance than I can just talking here now. But we do give thought and to those kinds of things, like what, how will, you know, like, what is the value of this? Like, where does the value lie? And if it is a collection that would really benefit from emulation, then we would disk image it. We don't rule out disk imaging altogether, but as a baseline practice, we say logical file transfer is the way to go. I also just want to add, there's right now in the digital archives community, there's a lot of conversation happening around this specific subject, logical file transfer versus disk imaging versus alternatives. And I would, this is a shameless plug, but there's going to be at least one, if not several sessions and presentations at the upcoming BitCurator user forum that address specifically this subject from a number of really interesting perspectives. And I'm just gonna, whoops, sorry, that's the link to the UC guidelines. I'll drop a link to the registration page and the program information for the BitCurator user forum, because if this is something you have questions about and or are interested in, I really do recommend considering that event. So yeah, and I hope that answered the question, but I'm happy to provide more detail.
This is Kate. I'll just add, thank you, Shira, on top of that, that I think our choice to promote logical transfer was also sort of a conscious choice to try to make it easier to get into this work. Many of the UC campuses have really not developed much infrastructure for born digital processing. So we wanted to kind of push back against the all or nothing kind of ideal and model this idea that you can start with something. And we felt like logical is an easier entry point for newcomers.
Thank you, Shara and Kate. We have two questions for Annalise and Kelly. Question from Mary: what is the purpose of reading room only accessed here?
Sure, I can talk about that a little bit, I think. So there are going to be some materials, and I think a lot of them will be the manuscript division materials where we have stuff that is just under copyright. So we don't have an agreement with, the donor about that. So we're going to have access to that in the reading room. The point of having that level in Figgy is so that we can kind of automate the process of making that material accessible on one of the reading room computers without having to kind of store that content separately on a bunch of different reading room laptops. I don't know if that answers the question or if Annalise has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think that covers everything I would have said. We're trying to plan for not just right now when we're focusing on remote, but also what we'll need in the future. And there will be cases, especially manuscripts, where we have to limit it to the reading room only, because even I think sharing with a password is not covered. It gets a little murky in some of the agreements. So it's just another option for us to utilize where we feel we need to.
Yeah, understood. And both of you, we have another question from Jean Kramer-Smith. I would love to hear more about Princeton's public digital content is surfaced for folks to discover online, or how Princeton's public digital content can be found for folks to discover.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's something that we are still kind of trying to figure out ourselves. This content is available through our finding aids, but in our current finding aids site, we're talking a lot about the redesign and what we're looking for in the new finding aids site and everything. And even with like a giant orange button for our digital content, in the finding aid, people still miss it, and unless you know it's there, it's really quite hard to find, and that is something we're trying to figure out. Again, we're kind of utilizing this time period to branch out in how we make our content visible and available for people more easily. We have an online exhibit site that has really only been used for formal exhibits that were once hosted in our physical exhibit space, but we're trying to maybe rework how we do that and find new approaches, not only to highlight what we have that is digital, but also to highlight collections people often don't see at all, and to surface, hidden collections and underrepresented voices in our collections. So we're kind of simultaneously working through that. And Kelly, I don't know if you have more to add other than this is a problem we know we have, and we're kind of trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I would second that.
Well, thank you. We have a couple questions for Sheridan and Brian before we wrap up. We only have a few more minutes. One from Jennifer Wachtel. You mentioned that the internship is typically 3 credits. Do you recommend that internship sites pay the tuition that students would otherwise have to pay for unpaid experiences?
So yeah, this is what we're kind of running up against. I think this is one of the biggest questions about internships right now, which is paid, unpaid, what are the ethics of that? The reality is that a lot of organizations don't have the money to bring somebody on, and as much time as they're giving to a student, they're doing enough staff time that it's kind of an even trade, so it's not really worthwhile for the organization to pay for, what effectively costs them staff time and things like that, or at least for some of these shorter internships. Like I said earlier, if we had a full-time, full semester requirement, I would think a lot differently about the money. Now for our program specifically, we formed an advisory group of librarians throughout the state a few years ago before I started with the program. And the surprising thing that happened was that while some people in the room were saying, hey, internships should be paid, internships should be supported, a lot of folks from smaller colleges, smaller public libraries, school districts that don't have much money, because we have very localized rather than county school districts for the most part here in Connecticut, they were adamant that internships should be unpaid because they were afraid of having to compete with these larger organizations. And ultimately, my colleagues in the department adopted that. I don't like us going that far, and quietly we've let a couple of students do paid internships, and in the coming months I am going to formally change those rules, but I'm kind of in a weird middle ground. Like, at something that's the length of a class, the student is getting enough out of their time, they're getting enough training, they're getting enough experience that that I feel like it's okay if they're paying tuition and not getting compensation for the internship itself, but I'm also working on trying to get us as many scholarships as possible to cover that tuition cost. I'm looking at organizations that can pay. I am offering my own time with some organizations around the state to help write grants for them to support different projects on the condition that, hey, since I helped you through this grant process, maybe you will be able to support and pay one of our internship students as part of this. So I don't think that there is a straight answer at this point.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we went over time. And I know Jessica and Emily have questions, but I'm sure you can contact Sheridan and Brian directly. And the recording of this will be made available as soon as possible. So spread the word and please join the BDAWG group. And I know Carla and I both thank all of you for attending.
Yes, thank you all for coming. We certainly appreciate it. And again, thanks to all the presenters. It was really great.
Yes, thank you. That was so great. And hopefully we'll have another one, and then have a great day, everyone.